My hands gripped the worn leather steering wheel of my decade-old sedan. To my in-laws, this car was a rolling symbol of my failure. Pulling up to their sprawling home for the annual family reunion felt like walking into an ambush. My father-in-law, Richard, didn't disappoint. "Ethan!" heard that thing rattling from a mile away. He bellowed from the porch, a smug grin spreading across his face. His son, Mark, chimed in, "Hey, at least it's fuel efficient, right?" A few cousins snickered. I just offered a tight smile, feeling my wife Sarah's anxious gaze. They had no idea. They saw an old car. I saw the final piece of a 10-year plan clicking perfectly into place. Inside, the scent of pot roast and condescension was thick. My mother-in-law, Carol, air-kissed Sarah. "That's a lovely dress, dear. Last season's, isn't it?" she murmured, her eyes flicking to me. Richard was already holding court. "Mark was just telling me about his commission bonus. 6 figures. We're celebrating with a new boat." He beamed, slapping his son on the back. Mark turned to me, his smile a weapon. "How's things at, Sparrow something? Still playing with spreadsheets in Denver?" He leaned in. "You know, my buddy's firm is hiring. Real estate. Big money." It wasn't an offer. It was an insult. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. "Mark, stop it." Her voice was thin, easily ignored. I gave a non-committal shrug. Let them think I was a struggling number cruncher. The core of my work at Sparrow Holdings wasn't about spreadsheets. It was about identifying undervalued assets. And standing here, in this house, I was looking at the most over-leveraged, emotionally bankrupt asset I'd ever seen. My smile was a slow, deliberate movement that didn't reach my eyes. "No, thanks, Mark. I'm good where I am." My gaze drifted past him to Richard, who was now pontificating about the stock market, getting every single detail wrong. He hadn't changed. He was the same man I'd faced a decade ago, in this very living room. Back then, the house didn't feel so grand. It felt like a courthouse where my life was being judged. Sarah and I had sat on the same floral sofa, our hands clasped so tightly our knuckles were white. My first tech venture had just imploded, vaporizing our savings. We weren't asking for a handout. We needed a small short-term loan to keep our apartment while I got back on my feet. $5,000. Richard had leaned back in his leather armchair, a throne of judgment, and steepled his fingers. "Ethan," he'd said, his voice dripping with paternal disappointment, "I can't, in good conscience, throw good money after bad. You have ambition, I'll grant you that. But you lack a practical head for business. You're a risk Sarah can't afford." He then turned to his daughter, my wife. "I told you, sweetheart, a steady man, a lawyer, a doctor, someone with a real job, not pipe dreams." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot spike in my chest. I saw the tears welling in Sarah's eyes, the way she shrank under her father's gaze. It wasn't just the refusal, it was the glee he took in it. The deep, smug satisfaction of being proven right. He wasn't just denying us a loan, he was trying to break our spirit. That night, driving home in our beat-up Civic, the predecessor to my current sedan, I made a promise. Not to Sarah, but to myself. I wouldn't get angry. I would get even. Not in some petty way. I would build an empire so vast, so silent, that one day I could walk back into that house and solve his biggest problem without him ever having to ask. Sparrow Holdings wasn't my first stop, but it was my destination. I started at the bottom of the financial world, devouring information, learning how money really ties moves. I sought out undervalued companies, the kinds of bad bets guys like Richard would sneer at, and I made them soar. This old car wasn't a sign of failure, it was my uniform, my camouflage. Every scratch on the bumper, every rattle from the engine, was a verse in a 10-year song of patience. It kept me hungry. More importantly, it kept them arrogant and blind. They saw a man struggling to keep up. They never saw the predator hiding in plain sight. My eyes snapped back to the present. Richard was laughing at one of his own jokes, holding his crystal glass of scotch. He looked so comfortable, so secure in his little kingdom. A kingdom built on a mountain of debt, a fact I happened to know. One of my firm's portfolio companies, a quietly expanding regional bank, had acquired his mortgage 6 months ago. He had no idea he was already living in my world, and today the final payment was due. The clinking of ice in Richard's glass was the only sound before he continued his lecture. It's all about secure assets, real estate, bricks and mortar, not this tech bubble nonsense. He waved a dismissive hand, a clear shot at my failed venture from a decade ago. You need something you can stand on, something that lasts. Funny you should mention that, Richard, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room's lazy chatter like a razor. Every head turned. Sarah's eyes widened, a silent question in them. Richard raised an eyebrow. Got something to add, Ethan? A stock tip from the minor leagues? Something like that, I replied, my gaze locked on his. I took a slow step forward, away from the wall I'd been leaning against. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy. I wanted to talk about assets, specifically this one. I gestured vaguely at the room, at the house itself. Mark scoffed. What about it? Dad built this place from the ground up. It's a fortress. Fortresses can have vulnerabilities, I said, my voice still even, especially when they're heavily leveraged. Richard, you're always talking about smart financial planning, so let's talk about yours. His face began to flush, a blotchy red creeping up his neck. Now you listen here. My finances are none of your damn business. They became my business 6 months ago, I said, letting the words hang in the air. I saw the first flicker of real unease in his eyes. He was trying to connect dots that weren't there yet. Do you remember refinancing a few years back? With Sterling Creek Bank? He nodded slowly, warily. Best rate on the market. Sterling Creek ran into some trouble, overextended. A portfolio of their distressed assets was acquired by a larger, more stable regional bank, Northwood Mutual. A cousin whispered something to his wife. I could feel Sarah's hand hovering near my back, not sure if she should stop me or support me. She was as lost as they were. And Northwood Mutual, I continued, taking another deliberate step closer to Richard's armchair throne, is a recent, and very quiet, acquisition of one of my firm's holding companies. Silence. Not the comfortable, lazy silence from before, but a stark, ringing void. Richard's smug expression had melted away, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of disbelief. Mark looked from me to his father, his brain visibly struggling to process the information. Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Your mortgage, Richard, I stated, the words precise and cold. The deed to this house. The bricks and mortar you're so proud of. For the last 6 months, it's been sitting on my desk. I reached into my jacket pocket. My hand didn't shake. I pulled out a single, folded document. It wasn't theatrical, just a simple piece of paper. And I also know, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that everyone strained to hear, that you've been scrambling. I know you missed the last 2 payments. I know you begged for an extension on the balloon payment that was due today. Richard tried to speak. A dry, rasping sound came out. He looked smaller in his big chair, the throne now looking more like an electric chair. I unfolded the paper. This is a deed of reconveyance. It's a legal document stating that a debt has been paid in full. I looked directly at him, letting him see the complete lack of malice in my eyes. Not malice, just finality. Sarah and I wanted to give you a family reunion gift. I placed the document on the polished coffee table in front of him. Something that lasts. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a mundane noise in a moment that was anything but. Richard's gaze was fixed on the single sheet of paper as if it were a venomous snake coiled on his expensive coffee table. His hand, usually so steady when lifting a glass of scotch, trembled as he reached for it. The rustle of the paper was like a gunshot in the dead air. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, his face draining of its florid color until it was a pasty, sickly gray. Mark was the first to find his voice, raw and accusatory. "What the hell is this, Ethan? Some kind of sick joke? You forge a document to make Dad look bad?" I didn't look at him. My attention was on Richard. "It's a notarized, legally filed document, Mark. Your father's attorney will confirm its authenticity." My voice was quiet, devoid of triumph. It was the calm of a mission completed. Then, I felt a different touch on my arm. Sarah. Her fingers weren't tight with anxiety anymore. They were trembling with a different energy. "Ethan?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes, wide and searching, weren't looking at her parents. They were locked on me, trying to reconcile the man who drove a 10-year-old car with the one who could erase a 6-figure debt with a single piece of paper. I finally turned my full attention to her, the rest of the room fading into a blurry diorama of shock. 10 years ago, I said, my voice for her alone, in this room I made myself a promise, that I would never again let them have the power to make you feel small, that I would build a fortress of our own, one they could never touch. Carol finally spoke, her voice a brittle whisper. "Richard, is it paid?" He didn't answer her. He just, slowly, carefully folded the deed of reconveyance along its original creases, his movements stiff and robotic. He set it back on the table with a strange reverence, as if it were a death certificate. He looked like a man who had just been unplugged from his own life. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But they weren't the tears of humiliation I saw a decade ago. They were something else entirely. Understanding. Awe. The culmination of 1,000 small sacrifices she'd never even known I was making. The old car, the modest holidays, the quiet life, it all snapped into focus for her in that one, shattering instant. My secrecy hadn't been about excluding her. It had been about protecting her until the war was won. I squeezed her hand gently. "The debt is paid, Sarah. All of it." I didn't just mean the mortgage. And in the way she looked at me, with a love and respect so profound it stole the air from my lungs, I knew she understood. The thick, suffocating silence was finally shattered by Mark. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. His face was a mask of crimson fury and wounded pride. "You son of a bitch," he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "This whole time? The crap car? The quiet act? It was all a setup. You did this just to humiliate my father? To make yourself feel like a big man?" He advanced a step, his fists clenched at his sides. I didn't move. I didn't even look at him. My focus remained on Richard, who looked like he'd aged 20 years in 20 minutes. "This was never about humiliation, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through his anger with cold precision. "It was about a transaction. Your father defined our relationship by a single metric, financial success. I'm simply closing the ledger, in terms he can understand." I turned then, my back to Mark and his impotent rage, and faced my wife. I reached for her hand, and this time, her fingers laced through mine, strong and sure. The awe in her eyes was now mixed with a fierce protective fire. She understood. She was with me. "Sarah," I said softly, for her alone, "let's go home." We turned toward the door together, a single unit. "Wait." The voice was thin, reedy, a ghost of the booming baritone that had judged me a decade ago. It was Richard. He hadn't stood up. He just raised his head, his eyes hollow. The question in them wasn't angry. It was a plea for understanding from a man whose entire world had just been dismantled. "Why?" he asked, the word barely a whisper. "Why do this?" I stopped, turning back to face him one last time. Sarah's hand remained firmly in mine, This was it, the final move. The reason for the past 10 years of silence and strategy. 10 years ago, in this room, you told me I was a risk Sarah couldn't afford. I began, my voice even, measured, like a surgeon outlining a procedure. You didn't just deny me a loan, Richard. You passed a verdict. You declared me unworthy of your daughter because my ambition didn't come with a safety net you approved of. You enjoyed it. I saw it in your eyes. I took a slow step back into the center of the room. The air crackled. I realized that day that arguing was pointless. You don't argue with a man like you. You change the facts. So I did. I spent a decade not getting angry, but getting quiet, getting smart. While you were talking about your boat, I was buying the port. While Mark was bragging about a commission, I was acquiring the bank that underwrote his firm. Mark's jaw dropped. Carol let out a small, strangled gasp. This house, I continued, gesturing to the opulent room, was just a line item. When my firm acquired the portfolio that contained your mortgage, I saw the whole picture. I saw the late payments. I saw the desperate requests for extensions. I also saw the financials for Richard's construction company. I let that hang in the air. Richard's face went from pale to ashen. It's barely solvent, I stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. Leverage to the hilt, bleeding cash on 2 stalled projects. You talk about bricks and mortar, but your foundation is sand. Mark's 6-figure bonus. A fiction to keep you from worrying. His real estate market is tanking, and he's living on credit. I let the brutal truth settle over the room, stripping away their last vestiges of pride. This wasn't about money. It was about reality. You asked me why, Richard. Here's why. I looked from him to Carol, to Mark, and back again. Because your judgment was a threat to my family. Your condescension was a poison. And I am removing the threat. Paying off this house wasn't the gift. It was just clearing the board for the real conversation. I reached into my other jacket pocket and pulled out a simple, crisp business card. Sparrow Holdings. I didn't hand it to him. I placed it on the coffee table, next to the deed of reconveyance. My firm is launching a new development arm. We're breaking ground on a major project outside Denver next quarter. We need a local construction partner with experience. A company we can rebuild from the ground up with the right capital and management. Richard stared at the card as if it were a lifeline and a death sentence all in one. I'm offering your company the primary contract, I said. It will save your business. It will secure your future. It will make you more successful than you've ever been. I paused, letting him absorb the impossible offer. The rescue, the salvation. Then I delivered the price. And in return, you will do one thing. You will learn respect. The mocking ends. The condescending remarks end. My car, my job, my life with your daughter are no longer topics for your family's amusement. Sarah is my wife and my partner, not a child you get to express disappointment in. From now on, you will treat her and me as equals. Our next family dinner, if there is one, will be about the weather. That's the deal. Take the contract or don't. It makes no difference to my bottom line. I didn't wait for an answer. The power was in not needing one. With Sarah's hand held tightly in mine, I turned, and we walked out of the silent, shattered room. We left the front door open behind us, letting the cool night air rush into the vacuum I had created, leaving them with the ruins of their pride and the blueprints for their salvation. The choice was theirs, but the victory was mine. The drive home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than we'd ever shared. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a long-married couple. It was the charged stillness of the air after a lightning strike. The familiar rattle of my sedan's engine seemed absurd now, a ridiculous costume I had forgotten to take off. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was replaying every shocked face in that living room. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice soft but clear over the hum of the road. You could have told me. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact, heavy with a decade of unshared burdens. I glanced at her. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could see the conflict in her eyes, the shock, the hurt, and something else, a dawning, fierce pride. "I know," I said, my voice rough, "and I'm sorry I couldn't. But Sarah, look back at the last 10 years, every time we saw them, every holiday, every phone call. If you had known the truth, you couldn't have hidden it. Not because you're a bad liar, but because you're a good person. They would have sensed it on you. Your anxiety would have been different. Your defense of me would have been different. They would have gotten suspicious, dug around." I took my eyes off the road for a second to meet her gaze. My entire strategy depended on their absolute, unshakable belief that I was a failure. Their arrogance was my camouflage. I couldn't risk tearing a hole in it. I couldn't put you in the position of having to lie to your own parents every single day. So I built the fortress from the outside to keep you safe inside. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the Denver city lights approach. When she finally spoke, a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "So all those times I defended you, all those times I fought with them, you were already winning a war. One didn't even know you were fighting." "I was winning it for us," I corrected her gently. I reached over and took her hand. It was cold, but her fingers curled around mine instantly, gripping me with a strength that said everything. The secrecy was forgiven. The war was understood. 3 days passed. 3 days of absolute silence from her family. In that time, Sarah and I talked more than we had in years, filling in the gaps of a decade. She learned about Sparrow Holdings, about the quiet acquisitions, the calculated risks that had paid off 100-fold. She asked me if we were going to buy a new car. I told her I was getting attached to this one. She laughed, a real, unburdened laugh that felt like a reward in itself. On the third evening, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Richard." I put it on speaker, my eyes finding Sarah's across our kitchen island. I answered, "Ethan Vance." There was a pause, filled with the sound of a man swallowing his pride. The voice that came back was not the booming, self-assured baritone of the family patriarch. It was thin, tired, and stripped of all its bluster. "Ethan," he started, then stopped. He cleared his throat. My attorney has reviewed the contract proposal. It's generous." Another pause. "My company, we accept your terms." I didn't say "I know." I didn't say "good." I kept my tone level, professional. The same tone I would use with any new business partner. "Excellent. My office will courier the finalized paperwork to you tomorrow morning. We'll need your signature by noon. The introductory project meeting with my development team is scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. Be on time." "We will be," he said, the words small and clipped. There was a beat of silence, as if he wanted to say more, to apologize, to rage, to ask why again. But he couldn't. The terms of the deal were clear. The mocking was over. The condescension was over. All that was left was business. "I'll see you Tuesday, Richard," I said, and before he could respond, I ended the call. The silence that filled our kitchen was a peaceful one. The cycle was broken. Justice hadn't been a gift I'd given. It was a consequence they had earned. Richard hadn't been defeated by my wealth. He had been defeated by his own character, forced to trade his pride for his survival. He would now build his future on a foundation of respect he was forced to give. Sarah walked around the island and wrapped her arms around my neck, resting her head on my shoulder. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Outside, my 10-year-old car sat in the driveway, its purpose served. It was no longer a symbol of perceived failure. It was a monument to a promise kept. Tuesday morning arrived, crisp and clear. At 8:45 a.m., Richard and Mark Vance walked into the lobby of Sparrow Holdings. It wasn't the opulent, glass and steel monstrosity they might have expected. It was discreet, elegant, a place where serious money moved without announcement. They were 15 minutes early. They looked tired, their expensive suits seeming ill-fitting, like costumes for a role they no longer knew how to play. I met them in the conference room. No grand desk, just a long oak table with a commanding view of the Denver skyline. I was already seated, a single tablet in front of me. I didn't stand when they entered. I just nodded. "Richard, Mark, take a seat." They sat opposite me, their briefcases placed carefully on the floor. The blustering, back-slapping bravado was gone, replaced by a tense, brittle silence. Richard cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet room. "Ethan, thank you for this opportunity." "This isn't an opportunity," I replied, my voice neutral, devoid of warmth or malice. "It's a contract, with terms." I swiped the screen of my tablet, and the project schematics appeared on the large monitor behind me. Project Nightingale. 300 residential units, a commercial hub, and a green space initiative. Your company is slated for Phase 1, Foundation and Structural Framework. I laid out the timeline, the budget constraints, the non-negotiable quality standards. I was direct, uncompromising. I asked pointed questions about their current equipment, their manpower, their supply chain logistics, all areas I already knew were deeply flawed. For the first time in his life, Richard didn't posture. He didn't deflect. He answered with a stark, humbling honesty. "Our excavators are older models. We'd need to lease newer equipment to meet that timeline." Mark, who once offered me a job in real estate, sat silently beside his father, taking notes like a nervous intern. He only spoke when I addressed him directly about permitting, his answers clipped and deferential. "Yes, we'll have that filed by Friday." An hour later, I stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "My team will be in touch with your foreman. I expect daily progress reports, no exceptions." They nodded, gathering their things. As they walked towards the door, Richard paused, his hand on the handle. He turned back, his face a complex mask of humiliation and something else, gratitude. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. I just gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The message was clear. We don't need to talk about it, just do the work. Watching them leave, I knew this was the real victory. Not the house, not the money. So I have to ask you all, was paying off their mortgage an act of true generosity? Or was it the most epic way to prove a point? Let me know what you think in the comments.